It's the One Podcast.
So how do you kind of deal as a founder or as a team, just like with that patience?
Or why this technology deserves to exist, why it's distinct. Not just being perfect on the pitch, but being perfect with how you talk with every single person you come across.
Are you ready?
Hey guys, so we got a new episode of the One Podcast here. We just switched providers as far as the podcast studio goes, some new equipment. So should be some better quality, or at least more interesting quality for the folks listening and watching. I got Josh Rabinowitz here from Articulate Labs. He's a guy that I've known for a little while, a self-made entrepreneur. And I think in a niche that we haven't covered, I'm always trying to get people on who have interesting businesses and interesting backgrounds that are just like not typically heard of in the startup and kind of online space. So Josh, do you want to just give a quick intro to what you're doing with Articulate and your background?
Sure. So with Articulate Labs, we are building wearable devices to augment and restore muscle function during everyday activity using movement synchronous electrical muscle stimulation. The goal of the technology is to help accelerate physical rehabilitation, to do so in a way that's effective, convenient, and comfortable, and personalized or tailored to the end user's particular rehab needs. First place where we're doing this is addressing quadriceps weakness and inhibition that exacerbates knee pain and dysfunction for 15 million in the U.S. with osteoarthritis, plus another million recovering from some form of knee surgery.
Cool. So how did you have that kind of like healthcare background, or how did you get, you know what I'm saying, in that field?
Yeah. Full disclosure there, had no previous background in either medicine, engineering, or business before getting into this. So there's been a few learning curves I had to work my way up. My education's in political theory. Actually, I started off in policy. Enjoyed policy, didn't necessarily enjoy the people or the structures I was working within.
Sure.
Got into nonprofits, got the bug for building stuff from the ground up. But then, got into this after getting done with a nonprofit engagement, because my co-founder was developing this for himself, this technology for himself to address his own mobility and rehab needs. He lost his right leg below the knee in a motorcycle accident, wore out the cartilage in the knee of his fully intact leg, and found physical therapy to be highly effective for addressing that dysfunction, but wasn't able to make it to all the physical therapy sessions that he needed because of distance and work and family commitments. That's what kind of started this idea of finding ways to bring physical therapy to the patient when the patient couldn't come to physical therapy.
Nice. So yeah, we had a guy on last week, or it hasn't been released yet, but in the nonprofit world. So I think it makes sense that given your political public sector, you know what I'm saying, that you might be familiar even without that healthcare experience. Just like broad general question that we can ask everybody, but did you always see yourself as being an entrepreneur type person, like not wanting to have a job, or was it really tied to meeting this specific co-founder and, you know what I'm saying, the problem? Or did you have that entrepreneurial drive?
I never did. I really didn't.
Never did.
No. I remember doing things in elementary school that like lemonade stands and whatever, because it's part of class, but never had that overriding urge to sell things to people or to be my own boss or anything like that. If anything, quite the opposite. I definitely came from a place of being very used to structure and working through to-do lists and following other people's priorities. And it took a long time to actually break myself of those particular habits in order to do this work.
Yeah, it's interesting. Most of the people we interview like have that same answer to that question. So it's interesting just like how many the people that come into entrepreneurship. But in any case, so you mentioned the co-founder. Can you give us like a little more details on how you guys met and how quickly did that business relationship and the company develop from he broke the leg in the motorcycle accident and all that type of thing?
So for full disclosure there, my co-founder is also my spouse. So we've known each other
Okay.
for quite some time.
Interesting there.
And
Okay.
yeah, so it just so happened we're also both kind of workaholics. And
Okay.
when it came to getting involved in this, really the key thing was just that it was the most interesting opportunity available at the time. I learned in the time in nonprofits that I liked picking up new skills, picking up new trades, airdropping into unfamiliar circumstances and figuring my way out. And this was as unfamiliar as it could get. So that was the appeal.
Got it. So walk us through the for people who are like unfamiliar, walk just through actually like what are you selling? What does the company do?
Sure. So let me start with the kind of the base technology, which is a neuromuscular electrical stimulation. And that involves running current through
Big
muscle.
word there.
What?
I said that's a large word for people.
Yeah, big words, very simple concept, the same as elementary school test. If you ever hooked a 9-volt up to a frog's leg and made it jump, pretty much the exact same concept in terms of running current through a muscle in order to force it to contract. That's been in use in physical therapy for some time to assist with muscle strengthening, muscle re-education as well. There's a phenomenon with musculoskeletal injury where not just you have an issue of muscle weakening due to disuse, but you also have an inhibition of the ability to fully contract the muscle. It's a central nervous system response trying to stop you from doing any further damage to that particular joint. But both the weakness and inhibition actually wind up, specific with the knee, actually wind up exacerbating the situation because the musculature is going to be responsible in large part for shock absorption, weight distribution, and generally trying to make sure that you're not putting more force through already damaged parts of the knee. So that technology has been in existence for some time, but it's largely simplistic, operating on pre-programmed stimulation sequences, and requires you basically to remain stationary. It didn't seem like that was necessary, especially to my co-founder, who's got a background in control systems and embedded design, where a lot of the issues around real-time reaction to environmental stimuli, at least in his previous sectors, are largely solved problems, or at least technology and software had advanced to a point to really incorporate real-time activity. So it was the intention of the technology and the development was to integrate that real-time elements, specifically using developing a real-time operating system that would, and then also using new motion tracking hardware to actually look at position, motion, acceleration, rotation of the femur and tibia relative to one another as a way to dynamically drive stimulation in time with movement.
Got it.
So that's what we're building.
I guess so. Just to kind of disentangle that a little bit, so that would you have. I want to talk the split between like you and your co-founder, like who's doing what, but to establish it like overall, there's a physical product here that you have to develop. So there's like a real engineering kind of role that has to be provided there. Is that something that you build a team for? How do you actually go about like building out these products? What's the actual workflow? You know what I'm saying?
So ours has been somewhat unusual. The short answer is
R&D, right? So
absolutely R&D. And generally it's the type of thing that you do want to build a team for. But the way we wound up doing things was almost entirely in-house. My co-founder came in with the software background, but then pretty quickly taught himself to work a mill and a lathe, and we built up a small machine shop in a living room to be able to start building initial prototypes on this device, and then iterated internally to develop a good form factor that could stay on the leg throughout flexion and extension. But no, generally in terms of team, at least for a product like this, you would have people with embedded hardware experience. You'd have people with software, or you'd have, I'll say this, you want people with that experience. We have that experience, but that experience kind of winds up being all in one or fewer or small number of people. Hardware, form factor development. So not just understanding materials and construction techniques, but also understanding usability and the ability and ergonomics, being able to take one form factor and be able to fit it to a wide variety of limb shapes and sizes.
Sure.
We're going to have that control systems part of that. Growing out now the data collection side of things, the same hardware that we're using to drive simulation time and location can also be used to collect information like knee range of motion or stride speed, steps walked, things like that. So there's going to be a need for capability to build out the back end of the device to collect information, have an EMR, EHR layer to be able to communicate with things like Epic and Cerner to be able to communicate the data being collected. And we need to have development of an app to control the device. So yeah, there's all kinds of capabilities that we either had to learn or are in the process of recruiting.
Got it. And so how long are you still obviously the product is in like continuous development, but how long is that period for you of development before you can go to market? And I guess that's a bad question because it's like a perpetual thing, but I don't are you selling like MVP? What is it? How are you generating revenue? Are you funding it? You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm trying to wrap my head around.
Yeah. So we are
most people in the podcast, like most people in the kind of podcast community, they're most familiar with a SaaS or an agency model, right? Where you're going right to market with the MVP, and you're generating revenue. So they're looking at it a little bit differently. So that's being more deep into the science and the engineering here. Like, how do you manage that business side of it, or what does it look like?
You're right that there is continuous development. Some of that, and also some of the amount of time that development either has been taking place or, truth be told, we had a period of time where we effectively paused operations on the company. And that's because early on, there wasn't a product market fit. It was a relatively recent thing that there was interest in and reimbursement for remote care. And that's still a fraught process. So to answer your question with regards to revenue, products, things like that. So our devices are not yet cleared by the FDA. We cannot sell them outside of evaluation purposes, but we can, but we have been selling in that context. We recently secured a $1.3 million grant from the U.S. Army through a group called the Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium. That's funding a clinical trial that's going to purchase 50 hour devices to be used over at West Point on cadets who are recovering from ACL reconstruction.
Yeah. Because Josh, I was in an accelerator at college at Ward, and there were a lot of, I was doing an ed tech company. We went through I-Corps, and that whole kind of grant process, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But there was another company in the program called Neuroflow, where they had, it's like a headset for like PTSD soldiers and stuff like that. But I was always wondering the same question because it was a thing where like the product is not takes a lot of work to get it market ready. So that's actually that's like the objective as you're building out. You know what I'm saying? Before you get that approval, or before you finalize kind of the regulatory process.
Yeah, and it's certainly chicken and egg for many companies like us in this stage where you need regulatory clearance to generate revenue, to get get interest from investors that are generally only looking at companies that have revenue. It's very very small group of funders that are willing to get involved on early or earlier stage life science companies, pre-revenue, understanding that there's going to be a long time and a lot of effort before that first sale that you wouldn't necessarily have with many SaaS products.
Got it. So now how do you learn that space? You know what I'm saying? Are you getting involved in accelerators? Like I know we're in Techstars, but do you find that to be like having that support with the type of company that you're running is like super critical to just have that structure?
Especially for me coming in again with that relatively unique background where in many cases I didn't necessarily know what I didn't know. Accelerators have absolutely been invaluable in that process, and not all accelerators are the same. They don't all focus on the same places. They don't necessarily have strengths in the same areas. They don't have the same networks. So we've participated in a couple of them now. You mentioned Techstars, and each brings something different to the party that we didn't necessarily have before. Focusing on Techstars, I'd say there it was really a bigger focus on moving from, uh, regulatory 101, reimbursement 101, clinical trials 101 to thinking about this as a growing company, thinking about KPIs, metrics that you would apply in terms of fundraising or achieving other business specific goals. So that's been invaluable. I'd say continually staying on top of published research in our space. So in that case, that's orthopedics, physical therapy, biomechanics, staying conversant enough to be able to hold my own in conversations with those particular experts as we go and reach out to them to gauge interest and get their support either as advisors or investors or to write letters of support for grant proposals, things like that.
Got it. So your day to day, like how would you, for both you and your co-founder, like what's the day to day for a business like this?
Oh
Where's your
boy,
time go for the most part?
it does vary. It can be chaotic. I would say again, for strictly for this quarter, the focus is on grant writing. So that's or grant proposal writing. That's where the majority of my time's going. Uh, I try to go from 7 to 7. Some days are better than that for others, but yeah, I'd say probably have an hour and a half dedicated to email, some amount of time dedicated in the early day to planning. But right now, the number one source of time, or use of time, is preparing to submit to AFWorks and to.
Got it. And how did that evolve, like from when you first started?
One of the places where we lost a lot of time, a lot of resources, was in building a company and technology to fit the needs of investors for whom there was absolutely no consequence to the advice they gave, or
Okay.
and to uh, or that there's also no consequence to them not necessarily being as conversant in the markets as they thought they would. We've had a lot more success in the recent past focusing specifically on talking with orthopedic surgeons or talking with physical therapists, talking with payers at insurers. These are the folks with whom we have direct alignment in terms of goals, where the intent is for people to get better and for them to get better in a time and cost efficient way. Where in theory, there should be a direct one-to-one correlation between that outcome and making a fundable company. But especially in a world with apps and SaaS and now many companies really looking to leverage generative AI, it doesn't look or it can look not less sexy, less interesting in terms of the kind of recurring revenue model that can be created with far less time and energy. Moving to build a company and a product that fits the needs of the people who are actually going to be buying our products has been immensely more productive. We've been moving much further forward faster doing that rather than looking strictly at how do we make our device or how do we make our company fundable based on the feedback that we're getting from funders, and how do we basically aim lower, do less, ask for less money, and give up
Sure.
more, which is the normal conversation with the quote unquote sophisticated investor.
Got it. So I guess there was this article today went viral on LinkedIn about just like some founder was posting on like a hacker forum or something about just like how hard it is to stick with the startup like over time. With your company, it seems like there's a long kind of process.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you deal as a founder or as a team, just like with that patience? Like how do you have that patience, or how do you look at like your long-term goals and the timeline? Because I know entrepreneurs are notorious for not over-promising things, but like underestimating the time that it takes to accomplish certain things. So like, how do you deal with that time?
We've been very guilty of that. I in particular have been very guilty of that in the past. Things that obviously we support each other, our investors and stakeholders or our advisors have been tremendously supportive. We've been very fortunate to bring in folks that were not willing to step over a dollar for a dime, or we're not willing to kind of step on our necks to get to something bigger. So that's been immensely helpful. We've had the opportunity to actually see people use our devices or have our devices be used in controlled settings and see this works. See people are getting pain relief. They're walking with greater confidence. They're walking with greater stability. And also
the purpose-driven. Obviously, you founded the company right based on a personal kind of incident, but so that I guess what you're saying is that connection and just like seeing the impact makes all of the effort that goes into it and the time worth it at the end of the day.
Yeah, I would say that. And the other thing I'd add with regards to the advisors, investors, the people that are supporting us, they've given us a lot. We do feel a level of duty in doing our best job possible to get them a return, or otherwise show them that the time and energy they spent on us wasn't in vain.
Quick aside, how did you go about getting the right advisors and the right stakeholders?
So some of that came in from my co-founder's startup. So there were we had some help right off the bat. That was fantastic. That many startups don't have. My co-founder also came in with some scars because that startup closed on a Series A, and then basically ran out of money within a year because of the management that was brought in by the new investors. It ramped up the burn rate to a pretty absurd level. So that was we came in with some inertia in that regard, but I'd say there was an extended period of time figuring out what the company needed, which meant you have to know enough to know what you don't know to be able to then match up expertise with those particular gaps, and then can understand what our respective personalities were, how they fit with others, to make sure that we're bringing in folks with whom there's going to be a good long-term relationship. And there's been some trial and error on that. We've had some misfires in terms of folks that we brought in. I think that's going to be inevitable with any growing organization, that we don't get it 100% right 100% of the time on hiring of any kind. But every time we have something like that, we learn what didn't work, and we try to figure out how did we get into that position in the first place, and then make sure not to replicate that issue.
Got it. Other than the topics we already discussed, advisors, just like the length of time required to create a company that has a physical product with lots of regulations in a regulated environment, what other kind of challenges have there been, and how have you addressed it?
One, with this particular type of technology, with neuromuscular electrical stimulation, There are a lot of devices in the electrical stimulation space on the market, and a lot of them are crap. First and foremost being like the ab belt. I think one of the challenges, one of the challenges was establishing credibility and proving that this device was distinct from the kind of random fly-by-night or stimulation devices that you could buy at a drugstore, or they're getting hogged by Shack or whatever. And there it was working with clinicians, staying up on research, having a sound logical basis for why this technology deserves to exist, why it's distinct from anything that's currently on the market, and also then going the hard route of getting regulatory clearance and getting clinical trial data, where many other devices in this space have used pathways through basically being treated as cosmetics as opposed to medical devices, as a way to get to market with a lower threshold. But then they also can't make the claims that we do, and they can't get into the spaces that we can.
Got it. What, in general, do you see as far as like the space of wearable devices? It seems like the consumer applications of wearables have, I don't know, you don't hear too much about the next Apple Watch, or you know what I'm saying, or the next wearable device outside of AR, VR, obviously. But do you see there being a lot of any trends in the wearable space, not the non-medical side of it, that you've observed, or I don't know, are curious about?
I think the interesting thing there is that the non-medical and the medical are slowly merging. It
Got it.
appears
Okay.
as the reimbursement is difficult for many new medical devices, and you're struggling against both the inertia of systems not necessarily wanting to go in some cases perverse incentives to not adopt new technologies if it means inadvertently cutting your own cash flow. The other side of that, you have more, like you mentioned, wearables getting big. A significant part of that is people deciding that they need to take their health into their own hands. They want to understand more of what's going on with their bodies, and they're doing that in part because the other side of that reimbursement consideration is that they're getting less and less from the insurance that they've been paying for. So as a result, we're seeing, specifically in the physical medicine space, more physical therapists moving to a cash-only model. You're seeing concierge medicine becoming a thing that more and more people are expecting, or getting at least getting comfortable with the idea of paying out of pocket for medical care that used to be part and parcel with their insurance plan, but that's no longer the case. So all that is to say, in the near future, we do see a device like ours and many others like ours moving from prescription only and being only at being a tool, being an extension of a medical professional, to operating as something that as a tool that a patient would buy themselves without necessarily going to a clinician, because they have either conducted their own research or otherwise understand that they've got a particular need to fulfill, and they can't do it in the current medical system.
So with respect to just like sales and your sales process, how has that kind of been built out? Obviously, you're trying to get people on a wait list, trying to gauge interest from people, top of the funnel. You can't do like advertising and maybe the same degree of content marketing, but how do you think about something like sales and marketing and just acquisition?
In terms of sales, we'll be likely selling through durable medical equipment suppliers to start. So there will be a fair amount of sales
partners.
Exactly. There'll be a fair amount of sales and marketing expertise kind of baked into those relationships that we would then just need to support internally, but don't necessarily need to build out a big sales team to support. In terms of marketing, the initial thought is to focus on conferences and symposia where our most likely prescribers are going to be assembled, given that to begin with, we're a prescription-only device. We have to get buy-in from those clinicians. That's where we assume those types of events will fill the top of the funnel. We'll have the opportunity to run live demos from there. I think ultimately the sales will be made or lost as a function of how this technology integrates into the clinician's workflow and into their overall cash management. Do we make their lives easier, and do we help them make more money per minute than just doing what they're doing right now? And a big part of that argument is ultimately going to hinge on remote care, the ability to provide care outside of the clinic, to do so without direct labor being involved, and being able to secure reimbursement as a function of remote therapeutic monitoring.
Josh, how do you think about what does the competitive landscape look like for you in your kind of niche?
In the very short term, our primary competitors are other technologies in the bracing and support or electrostimulation slash electromodulation space.
Okay.
We have not seen any other devices doing exactly what we're doing in terms of gait synchronous or adaptive gait synchronous stimulation. There are other gait devices that stimulate in time with gait to treat conditions like foot drop, which is something that happens for many after dealing with a stroke or multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy. But nothing like that in the quadriceps region where we're focused right now. Long term, we think our competitors are going to be in the remote and virtual physical therapy space, and the sword healths, the hinge healths, the computer vision based technologies that are being used to monitor how people are exercising. I think those are ultimately going to be the places where we have we're going to have a struggle there to prove that it makes sense to spend on doing a really good job rehabilitating one particular joint than to have one system try to do all things for all joints.
What are your long-term goals with the business?
We really want to be able to grow out this platform. The underlying the IP that we have granted is extensible to other joints and conditions. We would love to be able to build out networks of these devices to address more complex, first of all, to address more complex joints, like the musculature around the hip or the shoulder, but then to be able to address more complex system-wide musculoskeletal issues. Someone's recovering from a stroke or dealing with cerebral palsy. We'd love to be able to expand this into other verticals. A lot of interest in the sports medicine space. Obviously, like I mentioned with that Army contract, a lot of potential in the space of serving active duty soldiers and veterans. We potentially have value in application in space health, where muscle atrophy is something that happens pretty rapidly within a couple of weeks of weightlessness, of time spent in weightlessness. So we'd love to be able to expand out this technology, and either we grow our revenue, raise money to be able to do that ourselves, or we look at getting licensed by or acquired by a company in the orthopedics or the digital health space or the orthotic space.
And Josh, educate me. What IP? What is the IP like? A patent? What kind of IP are we talking about?
We have 4 utility patents granted around this technology, 4 in the U.S., and we have international coverage as well. Really all centered around the operating system that is modeling forces on the knee, and then driving stimulation as an outcome of those anticipated force vectors.
What sort of, you mentioned at the beginning, obviously not being the lemonade stand guy. What's 2 or 3 lessons, just agnostic to the product or the industry, perhaps, but what are 2 or 3 things that you've learned that you didn't expect?
I never thought I've always regarded myself as being pretty self-critical, and found myself very surprised that at points I was definitely either too in love with the technology or too in love with my own pitch, and that what I was
That makes
saying or
sense.
doing wasn't landing, wasn't resonating with the target population. So there's a constant need there for continually tearing apart and redoing how you present your work, to make sure that
Perfectionism, so to speak, or
but it's not just like not just being perfect on the pitch, but being perfect with how you talk with every single person you come
sure.
across.
I get what you're saying.
And that
Yeah.
means, yeah, so
The people pleasing type side of it.
it's actually kind of the opposite of having a perfect pitch, because it's very easy
Right.
to just fall into that one rote mechanism and make people feel like they're just listening to a recording. So that I'd say that's one big one. Two, always talk to your customers, talk to everyone in the chain between you as a manufacturer and the end user. Understand what their wants and needs are. Understand that in many cases, especially in the medical space, those wants and needs are potentially contradictory with other parts of that chain. That's something we've got to deal with. That the wants and needs of orthopedic surgeons and the wants and needs of physical therapists don't necessarily coincide with each other well, even though they need each other in order for a patient to fully recover from the procedure. So that would be two, is just understanding how those pieces fit. And then three is thinking about early stage companies, thinking about accelerators.
Right.
It's very easy to get pushed around and belittled or made to feel like you're not far enough along. Yeah. And you have to, as you're meeting folks like that, you have to pull back every now and again and recognize what is their real intent in providing the advice that they've got. Some folks, I think, genuinely will give good, tough love, and other folks are looking to set themselves up to look good to you, either because they need the approbation or because they're trying to sell you a service. I don't know how exactly to tell people to tell the two apart, except that once you've had experience with both and you look for it, then it becomes a pretty bright line.
Cool. Josh, thanks for coming on. Where can people find you? Are you hiring? Do you do mentoring for people who are, have similar businesses, or how can people connect with you?
We will be looking to hire so I'll back up first. Articulatelabs.com is our website. I'm also on LinkedIn, pretty easy to track down.
Nice.
The LinkedIn's probably a little bit better than the website right now. I could be doing a better job keeping that website up. Hiring is not anything we're doing right this moment, but in the near future, we will be looking to bring in something akin to either a chief product officer or a chief medical officer. We'll be looking to grow out a sales team. Lastly, on your mentoring point, I am actually mentoring a couple of companies in the medical space. Happy to talk with other companies that are looking, or other people looking to enter into the space and share minimally the things that I've done wrong that I'd like to see other people not repeat.
Cool. This is the One Podcast. Subscribe.